Hi, my name is Elaine Eshbaugh. I work at the University of Northern Iowa. I am a professor of gerontology and I do coordinate that program. So, as you might guess, one of my biggest challenges is recruiting students into gerontology. So, today I'm going to talk about educating and exciting students about opportunities in gerontology, which is, to be honest, one of my biggest career challenges. I am in a field that, um, I'm really excited to be in, and I see so many awesome, amazing opportunities and really diverse ways to work with older adults. And I struggle a little bit because it's difficult to get students engaged in a field like gerontology. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why, and I'm also going to talk about a research study that we did to look a little bit more at maybe what drew our current students into gerontology and hopefully what we can do to draw more students into this field. All right, so you're going to have to bear with me here for a moment. This is me. That's little Elaine, and she is dressed as a cat. She lived in St. Louis, so she was getting ready to go trick-or-treating in St. Louis. Now, what's important about little Elaine here is that she was already developing a comfortable relationship with aging in older adults because little Elaine's mom was an activity director at a nursing home. And that made little Elaine an actress, a dancer, a model, and a singer. So you might wonder where I'm going with this, but my mom was the activity director. When an activity canceled or they couldn't find an activity, I was the activity. So as a small child, I acted, I danced, I modeled my school clothes. I sang. I am not a good singer. I was not a good singer then. I never will be a good singer. The residents thought I had a beautiful voice. So my mom will always talk about how I have a comfort in public speaking and in talking in front of groups. And she says I owe that to the residents at the nursing home because they were always excited to watch me do whatever I do. So the nursing home was a place that I enjoyed being because, it made me feel very appreciated as a kid. And not everyone has that opportunity to, quote, I don't want to say grow up in a nursing home, but really, spend that time at a nursing home because my mom was the activity director. She, was a single mom. I'm an only child and she couldn't afford daycare. And I hung out with those residents all day. And, it was a great place to be because I was loved. And I had the best playmates. My playmates sometimes had dementia and we played school. They weren't playing, they really were teachers. I had one woman who used to work at a train station and we played train station all day. And it was a fantastic experience. So it's no wonder that I enjoy being with older adults and I don't have any problems or any fears in interacting with them. What I'm finding, having coordinated our gerontology program for, oh goodness, 10-ish years now, is that most of my gerontology majors have some sort of family background in the field. There's someone in their family who worked at a nursing home. I have someone who, both of their parents were nursing home administrators, or maybe I have someone whose mom worked in hospice. So for the most part, I find that those students who come to college and say, I'm majoring in gerontology, this is something that is kind of a family background for them. Now, unfortunately, our older population is aging. Actually, that's not an unfortunately, but our older population is aging. What the unfortunately is that we don't have enough young people going into this field to meet the needs of our older adults. So we are going to have to try to draw some people into this field who maybe didn't know anything about it in order to meet that need. So we are seeing a huge demographic shift in the United States. And if you are interested in aging enough to be at this presentation, you probably already know that. So our baby boom generation, 1946 to 1964 birth dates, is aging. And I'm showing you a picture of my favorite baby boomer, which is my mother. And you might say, wow, why is she wearing a tie-dye shirt in every picture here? It's because she's a true baby boomer. She loves the tie-dye. She retired, and tie-dyeing is her hobby. You'll see her with some children here. Most of those are going to be nieces and nephews, except the one that is furry and four-legged. That's that's my son. So that is her grand dog. But my mom, growing up, I remember her talking to me about something, and it never made sense until much later. You know how people say, "Oh, you know, my mom or my grandma, grandpa, they said that they had to walk to school in the snow, uphill, both ways, 9 months a year to get to school." Okay. My mom would always talk about going to school at 5:30 in the morning. And I thought she was just being dramatic, because when I would say, "Oh, I have to get up at 7:30 to go to school," she would talk about being up, having to be at school at 6 in the morning. And it never made a lot of sense to me until finally, I was probably in my 20s before I was like, why did you have to be at school so early? Well, she grew up in St. Louis, and because of the baby boom generation, she was born in, Mom, forgive me for saying the year you were born. She was born in 1953. And there were so many children born around that time in the St. Louis area that their schools could not accommodate all of those children at the same time. So when she went to high school, there was an early shift. So what she did not tell me, Mom, was that she had to be at school early morning, but she was done by like 12:30. And then the second shift came in. So it made sense when she talked about it later. I got more into this gerontology thing. I learned about the baby boom generation. And then I realized something. My mom, she's not close to being in a nursing home. She lives very independently. I don't think she's going to be there anytime soon. But if my mom is going to a nursing home, there can't be two shifts, right? You can't do the morning and the afternoon at the nursing home. We are trying to accommodate all of these baby boomers as they age in our healthcare system and in our senior living system. So in 2030, 1 in 5 Americans is projected to be 65 plus. In the population of what we typically call the oldest of the old, those 85 plus could grow from 6 million in 2014 to 20 million by 2060. Right now, about 46 million people in America are 65 plus. But by 2050, we expect that number to almost double to 90 million. And I also, because this is the Iowa Aging Summit, I will point out that we see this trend more in rural areas. So rural residents actually tend to be older on average than our urban residents in this country. So Iowa, if we look at the states and the percentage 65 plus, we are a state that has more older people. And part of that is also due, if you look at the mean age and the demographics, is because many young people do leave Iowa. So what that means overall is we have a demand for professionals in aging. As the older population increases, the demand for professionals in aging increases. It's really not complicated. So we need to think outside those traditional healthcare or caregiving careers. For instance, if I talk to people, when I bore people at a party, I do it a lot. When I bore people at a party, I used to do it a lot before COVID. Now I don't go to parties. I would talk about careers in aging, and people would think I was talking about careers in nursing or careers in healthcare. And I want people to understand this is bigger than healthcare. So we have an aging generation who has a lot of needs, and to just assume all of their needs are healthcare based is actually a little bit discriminatory. So they have religious needs. They have, for some people, they would call them spiritual needs. They have needs for exercise. They have needs for entertainment, for leisure, for travel. It's not all about healthcare. So we have a lot of opportunities, obviously, inside healthcare, but we also have these opportunities we forget about outside healthcare. So I listed some fields where, some of them it's very obvious you need expertise in aging to be in this field. Some of them are not so obvious. So, for instance, leisure services. If you work at a city rec center or even a for-profit gym, having opportunities for older adults, figuring out what they need, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Pickleball is a really big thing right now. So leisure services, organizing pickleball leagues, and providing opportunities for older adults to be fit and enjoy life. Huge field right now. Marketing. I read a statistic recently, and if you email me, I could probably come up with the citation, but that it makes total sense. More than half of the toys in the United States are bought by people 65 plus. When I thought about it, it really wasn't that surprising. Who's buying all those really loud, obnoxious toys? It's grandma and grandpa. It's not mom and dad. So how do we market to older adults? That's big business. It's also big business marketing senior care or senior living. If you have a nursing home, assisted living, independent living, senior apartments, you got to market those, right? You got to get people to move in. And as morose and terrible as it kind of sounds to people, it's about services like hospice as well. So we have, in the community I live in, I would have to, Google it and take account. But at one point, I looked recently, and we had about 7 or 8 hospice services in the Cedar Valley. How are you going to get someone to choose your hospice service? What do you offer that other people don't offer? So marketing to older adults is really big business. And unfortunately, we have a lot of students who are going into business-related fields, and they're not getting any background in this. Speech therapy. One of the things that speech therapists do is that they work with swallowing. So when we have people who have Alzheimer's or related dementias, and there may be an issue with swallowing where maybe they're not sure if someone is at risk of aspiration, that's speech therapy. One of the most important links I think I've made in my time at the university is that I've developed a really good relationship with communication disorders and speech language pathology, because a lot of those students have realized that if they can have an expertise in aging, they're going to be really marketable. And a lot of them pick up minors in gerontology. Interior design. How do we design to keep people in their homes? Architecture. I'm working at UNI with our mental health counseling program on how we can create a new generation of counselors that is more qualified to work with aging individuals, and also those who might be caregivers for aging individuals, particularly those who have Alzheimer's or related dementias. Elder law, also family mediation. So we have a lot of families, you may have seen this in your own family, a lot of families who really struggle with communication and decision-making for an older adult who may not really feel like they're able to make choices for themselves. I was talking to a student last night about careers in gerontology, and we were discussing how one of the areas that doesn't get enough attention is technology. So how can we create technology that helps keep older people independent longer? So we have some machines, they're not really new anymore, but we have some machines that are pill dispensers, okay? So it dispenses certain pills, you load it up, dispenses certain pills at certain times, right? So if someone, say, with early stage dementia is living alone, spits those pills out, it beeps until the person takes them. If a person doesn't take them within, you can set a time, 30 minutes, an hour, then a phone call is placed, or an alert or a text is placed to someone's caregiver, a family member, a son, a daughter, that says they haven't taken their medication, and that might alert the person that there's a problem. You know what? The person who came up with this, I'm sure they're rich. I'm sure they're wealthy. So these different types of technologies are really important, and people are willing to pay, to be honest, they're willing to pay a lot of money to remain independent and remain in their own homes. And the money they pay for that is going to be a lot less than they might pay for a nursing home. So I want to kind of promote the idea that we need to start thinking outside the box, outside traditional healthcare and caregiving options, when we talk to young people about careers in aging. So some myths about careers in aging, these are things that I fight in my job trying to get students interested in the gerontology major. A lot of people think the only jobs with older adults are going to be jobs in nursing homes. We need to keep in mind that only about 4 to 5% of those 65 plus live in a facility. The rest of those people are living at home, maybe by themselves, maybe with family, maybe with a friend. So when we talk about serving older adults, it really does a discredit to, honestly, the vast majority of that population if we only talk about those who are in nursing homes. We also have to fight the myth that all jobs with older adults involve direct care, taking somebody to the bathroom. I'm going to use that as kind of an analogy, because a lot of times if I talk to students who are freshmen, sophomores about, you have an undecided major, what are you looking at? If I mention gerontology, a lot of times they'll come back with, I don't really know if I could take people to the bathroom. And the funny thing about it is, ironically, if you graduate from my gerontology program at the University of Northern Iowa, you're not going to be qualified to take someone to the bathroom. You would have to do like a CNA course in order to be qualified to do that. So a lot of careers with older adults don't involve direct care. And, in all honesty, direct care is very rewarding for many people. It's also really hard on your body over time. We tend to also sometimes get into this trap where we think all jobs with older adults are with frail and sick older adults. So when I tell students, tell anybody, I work in gerontology, I'm a gerontologist, they picture the left, okay? They picture the sadness, the isolation, the nursing home, someone who's very close to death. They do not picture the right, which should be those two people walking. They do not picture our active, healthy, older adult population. Here's the thing about the baby boomers. A lot of them are not prepared financially or physically for the aging process. Some of them haven't done preventative care. But guess what? A lot of them have, right? So this is the fittest older adult population we've ever had. So if you're interested in personal training and you have just the slightest interest in aging, it's just an endless possibility, because the older adults, some of the older adults that I work with, they're retired. They have a lot of time for leisure. They have a lot of time for exercise, and they're looking for people to guide them through that process. So really, my big question since I started this position at UNI is, how can we interest more young people in careers in aging? So one of the things that a few years ago I decided to do with a colleague and a few students is to look at our students who are already interested in careers in aging and see if that might assist us in creating more and better strategies for getting more young people interested in the field. So I was talking to a group of freshmen. I was lecturing to a group of freshmen a couple weeks ago. Brand new freshmen to UNI. They had only been around, even around campus for a couple weeks. And I was doing this via Zoom. And I asked, I'm in gerontology. Anybody know what gerontology is? So there's a lot, maybe this was asked of about maybe 75 freshmen, and no one responds and no one responds. And, no one seems confident enough to put something forward. When I graduated high school, my first 3 weeks of college, I didn't know what gerontology was either, if you would have asked me. So the best response I get was study of gerons. And I actually really like that because that's a smart response, the study of gerons. So ology is the study, but you must be studying gerons. And I accepted that as a correct answer because my response was, if gerons are older adults, then you are absolutely correct. But my point is that most freshmen coming into college don't know what gerontology is. Other guesses I frequently get, people think I study rocks. And I actually got a phone message, it would have been last spring. I got a phone message from a guy who had 2 meteorites. And he left me a message and told me about his 2 meteorites and thought I would want to come and see them. And it took me a couple times replaying this message, and I realized, oh, gerontology, geology. Okay. And I felt really bad. Because it was obviously an older gentleman who was very excited about his meteorites. So there was a little bit of a crossover there. And actually, geology, ironically, is in my building. So I took a note downstairs and I said, hey, this guy wants you to look at his meteorites. So I hope they did. One of the questions I always ask about why I don't have more gerontology majors. I have awesome gerontology majors, and the major has grown. But why don't we have more? Okay, this is such a marketable field. Why don't we have more? So there's 2 different alternative explanations. One is, are students not tuned in? And that's that lack of awareness thing. You just don't know about careers in gerontology. You don't know about careers in aging. Right? No one ever told you. No one in your family was an activity director at a nursing home. You didn't get to model your school clothes at a nursing home. So really, you've just never thought about this as a career field, and you don't know that there are really exciting, well-paying careers in gerontology. Second option is, are students just not turned on, which means, do they know about these opportunities, but they're just not excited because, old people. Right? It just doesn't sound like a field that I would want to go into. So one of the things that I would suggest based on previous research I've done that I'm not going to get into today, and also previous research that other people have done, is it's more the first one. Okay? So we have to tune students in to career opportunities before we can turn them on. We can't turn them on if they don't know those opportunities are out there. So really our first goal is awareness that these fields are out there. So what we did a few years ago is we looked at characteristics of college students who want to work with older adults. Because my thought was, if I can figure out what these students have done in their past that makes them interested in this field, maybe I can find a way to replicate that experience and get other students interested in going into gerontology or aging related careers. So based on previous research, which I don't have a lot of time to discuss today, but based on previous research, we came up with a few different variables that we really wanted to look at in terms of do they predict how much students want to work with older adults. So death anxiety. So if you are someone who is personally afraid or has a great fear of their own death, that could mean that you're not willing or really able to work with older adults who might be closer to their death. Another thing we looked at in this study was aging anxiety. So anxiety about getting older. So if you're scared of getting old, maybe you don't want to be confronted with people who are old. And also we looked at empathy. So we use the multidimensional emotional empathy scale to figure out if students who are more empathetic would be more willing to work in gerontology. So I always have this thing that I say about ageism. And I know there's sexism, and I know there's racism, and we in our society have a lot of prejudice and a lot of discrimination and biases. I think I would be willing to put myself out there and say that ageism is one of the stupidest isms, because you are essentially discriminatory or biased against a group that you will someday, if you are lucky, be a part of. And I think for me, for someone to have empathy and realize, wow, this person is older. I'm probably going to be older someday, unless I die first. I'm probably going to be older someday. Wow, I want to take care of them like I would take care of myself. So empathy is something that I thought might be really important as well. And then beyond these personal factors, we looked at experiential factors. So one of the things we looked at is what I would call formal experiences with older adults. So that would be you had a job working with older adults. Maybe it was at a nursing home in dietary. Maybe you were a CNA. Maybe you did some volunteer work with older adults. Also, we looked at quality of relationships with elders, but we divided this into two categories: quality of relationships with unrelated elders. So that would be friends, neighbors. And the other thing we did look at is the quality of relationships with related elders. So that would be your grandma, your grandpa, great aunts, great uncles, etc. So we had 237 college undergraduates. 75% of them were female. Mean age, 20.1 years. They were actually pretty evenly split among the four classes: freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. The makeup in terms of the racial and ethnic breakdown was that 97% identified as white or European American. So one of the weaknesses of this study is we definitely cannot generalize our results across all ethnicities and races. The outcome variable is super simple. Students of all majors who were in this study, we asked them, what's your likelihood of working with older adults in your future career? So it wasn't if you were a gerontology major or if you weren't, because there's a lot of people who are not gerontology majors who may work with older adults in their future or have an interest in doing so. So that was on a scale of 1 to 7. And the mean on that was a little bit higher than I expected, 4.89. So we had people in various majors saying, yeah, I expect I will work with older adults. So these were social work majors, business majors, public health majors, leisure youth and human service majors. We did have some students who were in K through 12 education and were teaching majors. Most of them said, I'm probably not going to work with older adults. They gave that a 1. So what we did is we ran a regression analysis to try to predict that likelihood of working with older adults. And again, it's self-reported. So will these students go on to work with older adults? I don't know. And what percentage of time will they work with older adults even if they do? I don't know. So for instance, if you're a financial planner, maybe you will work with older adults. Will it be most of your clients? I don't know. So I'll jump in here and tell you about some of our results. And I'll start with those personal factors. First of all, again, regression analysis. So we're controlling for everything here. For instance, if I were to run this if you're a stat person, if I were to run this just as zero order correlation, empathy and aging anxiety would predict likelihood of working with adults. But here they don't, because what we're finding is that if we control for aging anxiety and empathy, the only personal factor that seems to be important is death anxiety. So empathy did not predict self-reported likelihood of working with older adults. Now the aging anxiety, there was a tendency for it to predict that lower levels of aging anxiety were related to work with older adults, but this did not reach our statistical significance level. So it should have been 0.05 there. No, it was 0.09. But finally, those with less death anxiety were more likely to predict that they would work with older adults in their future. P is less than 0.01 there. So that's what we found on those personal factors. The experiential factors were also involved in our model. So those who had that previous experience, which I call the formal experience of working with older adults, whether for pay or as a volunteer, that was predicted. So those who had worked with older adults previously were more likely to work with older adults in the future, as they predicted. Now, what's interesting next is we looked at that quality of relationships. So we asked people to rate their quality of relationships with unrelated older adults and related older adults. And only one of those was significant, and that was the unrelated older adults. So the quality of relationship with unrelated older people predicted the likelihood of working with older adults. So if you have had an experience being friends with a neighbor or a community member who's older, that tended to have more of a relationship with your predicted future than had a great relationship with my grandma. Relationships with grandma, they're great, but they didn't seem to predict you going into this field. Let me think here. What have I done? There we go. I'm sorry. I do want to talk a little bit about this death anxiety thing. So those who were more comfortable with death, with the idea or the concept of their own death, the concept that they're going to die someday, they were more comfortable working with older adults. So you may be able to, avoid a career or avoid interaction with older adults, it may help you to avoid that confrontation with the idea that you're going to die someday. But you may be able to deny that if you don't work with older adults, but if you do work with older adults, it becomes more difficult to deny that because you see people who might be closer to death, people you know might die, people you know might be talking about death. Older adults tend to talk more openly about death. So if you have a high level of death anxiety, you may choose a career where you're not exposed to those closer to negotiating their own death process. I think this speaks to a bigger issue in our society where we don't really raise people to be comfortable with death. And if you look up thanatology and culture, thanatology is the study of death, you will find that for white Americans, we really make an effort to kind of avoid exposing our young people to the realities of the death and dying process. Work and volunteer opportunities with older adults. And this is one that you have to struggle with in terms of, those who volunteer and work with older adults predict they're more likely to work with older adults, but were they working and volunteering with them in the first place because they're comfortable with that? So it's a causation versus correlation thing. Which came first? So working with older adults could have come first for some people. So maybe you're not really you're in high school, you're not that interested in working with older adults or that population, but you realize, hey, if I go through this course and get my CNA, I can work with nursing home residents. I'm going to make a lot more than I make working at McDonald's or Wendy's. So maybe you take that job with older adults for monetary reasons. Or maybe, again, this includes volunteer opportunities. You have some experience where you are forced to work with older adults. So maybe it's a course requirement in, a intro psych course you're taking in high school, or a developmental course you're taking. Another explanation is that those who have already, by the time I did this study and they're in college, those who have already worked and volunteered with older adults did so because they're just interested in working with older adults, and the actual experience didn't do anything in order to change their perception. It was already there. And finally, in terms of the quality of relationships, it is awesome to have a great relationship with your grandparents, but those types of relationships are not the types of relationships that make someone to seek out a career in aging or figure out how they can perhaps look at aging individuals as, a target for whatever they're doing, whether it be social work or therapy or counseling, etc. So the quality of relationships with older adult relatives, not significant, but let's talk about that second one. Quality of relationships with unrelated older adults. Was it a neighbor? Was it a friend of your grandparents? How did you become a friend to an older adult? Was an older adult a mentor to you? That seems to be really predictive of going into a career where you think you're going to work a lot with older adults. All right, so here's where I get to the kind of so what. And these are really questions for you. I don't have all the answers to these questions. If I had all of the answers to these questions, I would have, 400 gerontology majors instead of 50, but I'm not there. So we have an increasing demand for students who want to go into these fields. How do we get them there? So the first question, how can we combat myths about careers in aging? A lot of myths. So the only careers in aging are in healthcare. They're only at nursing homes, and they're only with frail elders. So I talked to a friend, actually just this morning, who is a professor of nursing. And she says when her students in her nursing courses think of careers working with older adults, the only thing their mind goes to is nursing homes. Again, most older adults are not in nursing homes. And although older adulthood does mean that many people have more chronic conditions, we have plenty of active older adults who are really looking at preventative health care and fitness. Next, how can we help young people form friendships with older adults? And as I talked about before, it's not your relationship with your grandma, your great-grandma, or your great-aunt. How can we promote intergenerational relationships? Right? The way our society is set up, we are set up to interact with peers of our own age, or our approximate own age at least. In the what I would call the olden days, I guess, Laura Ingalls Wilder, we had this one-room schoolhouse, and it wasn't exactly intergenerational because they were all children, but you had older children teaching younger children. You had people of, at least young people of different ages in that classroom. As time has gone on, we have actually become a little bit more age segregated. First graders interact with first graders, second graders interact with second graders. Looking at that, throughout the lifespan. So how do we promote relationships across age? How do we do that? How do we expose old people to young people and young people to old people? We find that these formal experiences, volunteer work experiences, predict likelihood of working with older adults. But my question is this, and I struggle with it. Should we force volunteer experience with older adults onto young people? So interesting thing, I had struggled for a while with a course I was teaching where I did require a certain service learning component. And I was sending young people out in the community to do some volunteer experience with older adults. And there's a lot of ways you can do this. You can do this, you could do it, and I threw out these ideas. You could do this through your rec center. You could do it through your area agency on aging. But all of the students went to nursing homes. And what I wonder about is with forcing them to find an opportunity, the nursing home is the easiest choice. Does that reinforce these myths about careers in aging and even myths about older adults? So there are plenty of ways to interact with and assist older adults. Some of them are nursing home residents, but some of them are kind of really that very fit and active population. How can we minimize fear of death and the avoidance of those who we perceive as being close to death? And that's a really big societal question, and do we include kids more in the death and dying process? When grandma or grandpa is in hospice and they're actively dying and they might have a few days, do we bring our kids in? Do we not? Is that going to minimize their fear of death, or is it going to maximize their fear of death? Should we start talking about death in different ways? So we don't like the word death. We like, grandma went to sleep. That's confusing for kids. It really is. But grandma went to sleep. Well, if I go to sleep tonight, will I not wake up tomorrow? So we say grandma's gone to be with Jesus. So we try to shelter our children from that. Is that minimizing their fear of death, or is it doing the opposite? And there are some studies on this, but really we don't have great answers on that. That's an area that's really hard to do research on. But how do we get past our own fears and our own anxieties in order to be with people who maybe are a little bit closer to death? And keeping in mind that just because you're in gerontology, I don't know what specific area you work in, but there's a good chance you may not deal with death every day. Hospice is one thing, but running a pickleball league through city services and serving older adults in that way, you don't see death day to day. So finally, I guess my question that I would pose to everyone who's willing to take it on, because I need the answers. I really need the answers. How do we make students aware of opportunities? How do we make students aware of the opportunities that exist because of our aging population? And finally, even if they are aware, if we want them in this field, we have got to get them excited about these opportunities. So how do we find a niche for someone who, they don't want to do direct care, they don't want to do healthcare, they don't want to do nursing, but how do we find a niche for them in this field? So how do we get an in with different programs across campuses and show them that having an angle where you know a little bit more about older adults and how you might target yourselves there? How do we get to the place where people realize that targeting yourself to older adults is going to make you more money, right? I get a lot of, when I talk about being in gerontology, I get a lot of people who will say, oh my gosh, you're a wonderful person. You're such a saint. No, I'm not. If you know me, that's not true. That's not true about me. But I'm here in this field because it's exciting to me. And there's a lot of innovative stuff going on in this field. And I found my niche and I make a living in this field. So this is not a field for saints and angels and people who, always put others' needs above their own. This is a field for professionals who have varying interests in various different things and are really excited and passionate about opportunities that they see. So I will share a story with you about one of my students who she graduated with a gerontology degree from UNI. And her boyfriend at the time, now her husband, was moving to Arizona for a job opportunity. She did a little market research on, the population in Arizona, and she said, this is a pretty good place for me to live. She also had a minor in a health-related field. She had been a student athlete at UNI, super passionate about health and fitness. So what she thought is, what if when I moved to Arizona, what if I get my personal training certification and I market myself as a personal trainer with expertise in aging? And I understand if someone has a knee replacement, what activities might be something they have to modify, what are activities they might have to do. So she moves to Arizona, and one thing she realizes, different than Iowa, because, Arizona does have a large retiree population, and the retiree population they have is very wealthy. When she started working with clients, she would say, well, I'll come once a week. What day do you want me to come? And they started saying, well, I want you to come every day. Okay? They're committed to health and fitness. They've got money. So, in Iowa, a retired guy might want a trainer to come to his house, a few days a week. But in Arizona, it's like literally every day of the week. So she has a wait list so long. The other thing that she has started doing is she has also, since she trains people right now in their home gyms, which is probably really, really positive because of COVID, she trains people in their home gyms. She started helping them set up a home gym, and buying the equipment that she thinks will be safest and easiest to use for them. So I talked to her a couple months ago, and her comment to me was just that if other personal trainers knew what opportunities were available to work with older adults, and if they knew what type of money she could make doing that, they would be floored. And she said as a benefit, she also gets paid a very high rate. She's able to charge a very high rate for her knowledge and personal training. She said, and as an added benefit, she said at least 2 or 3 days a week, she gets sent home with banana bread or cookies or something like that someone has made her. And she, the money's great. Don't get me wrong. I think she knows that, and she appreciates that the money is great, of course. But it is also a very rewarding career for her because she's found a niche. Okay, she's found a niche with older adults. And by having just a little bit of expertise and being able to bring that, she does something that is very meaningful and also very rewarding and very profitable. So I'm going to go ahead and end there. Thank you so much for listening, and it's really difficult to do a presentation pre-recorded by yourself. So I appreciate you hanging with me here. And I am at the University of Northern Iowa. If you ever want to connect with me, do not hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thanks.